The Resonance Between Us, Episode 7, The Red Pill Consciousness, Gender Narratives, Pain and Algorithmic Polarization. Hello, and welcome to The Resonance Between Us, a This Place Called Earth series exploring love, language, nervous systems, and the hidden architecture of human connection. In Episode 1, The Signal Before Words, we explored the first subtle movement of attraction, the possibility that connection begins before language catches up. Before the confession, before the label, before the story, something in the body may already be noticing, responding and orienting towards another person. In Episode 2, Mate Choice, we explored what desire may be selecting beneath conscious preference. Biology, evolutionary inheritance, cultural conditioning, memory, status, projection, and nervous system recognition all begin to participate in what we call attraction. We asked whether attraction is always as free as it feels, and whether what we call my type may reveal both desire and history. In Episode 3, The Nervous System of Love, we moved into attachment, regulation, and emotional safety. We explored how love does not live only in romance or feeling, but also in the body's learned expectations around closeness. Some people regulate us, some activate us, some feel safe because they help the nervous system soften. Others feel addictive because they awaken uncertainty, pursuit, and old emotional survival patterns. In Episode 4, The Mirror Effect, we explored projection, reflection, hidden recognition, and how another person can reveal what is still unconscious within us. We looked at how attraction can become a mirror, how recognition can be resonance or memory, and how the person we desire may not only show us who they are, but what they awaken in us. In Episode 5, Orbiting, we explored attention fields, presence, interpersonal gravity, and the way attraction can form as a field before it becomes contact. We looked at how attention becomes charged, how people can occupy awareness before anything is spoken, and how orbiting may be biological, psychological, digital, symbolic, spiritual, or all of these at once. In Episode 6, Alpha, Beta, Sigma, we explored archetypes, masculinity, identity construction, and the way people perform roles inside the field of attraction. We looked beneath the labels and asked whether dominance is always strength, whether detachment is always sovereignty, and whether softness is really weakness, or whether many of these roles are nervous system strategies shaped into cultural identity. Now we move into ideology, because when identity becomes performance, pain can easily become worldview. This episode is about the red pill consciousness, but it is not about approaching the subject in a lazy or one-sided way. It is not about pretending there are no real wounds beneath it. It is not about ignoring the rejection, loneliness, humiliation, betrayal, sexual insecurity, confusion, and social dislocation that can make people vulnerable to harsh explanations. But it is also not about defending the bitterness, dehumanization, manipulation, or gender contempt that can grow when pain is turned into ideology. The red pill is often presented as awakening. A person believes they have seen through illusion. They believe they now understand dating, gender, power, female nature, male weakness, attraction, manipulation, status, and sexual hierarchy. It can feel like clarity because it gives pain a map. It can feel like the truth because it explains rejection. It can feel like power because it turns vulnerability into strategy. It can feel like protection because it teaches the wounded person never to be fooled again. But not every awakening opens consciousness. Some awakenings close the heart. This is the tension we will explore in this episode. How does relational pain become belief? How does heartbreak become suspicion? How does rejection become resentment? How does shame become dominance fantasy? How does loneliness become ideology? How does the algorithm take wounded states and organize them into gender war, certainty, and polarization? Because the red pill is not only a set of ideas, it is often a nervous system response to pain that has been given ideological language. So let's begin. When pain becomes a lens, there is a particular kind of pain that does not remain only as pain. It becomes a lens. A person is rejected, and the rejection does not simply hurt. It begins to explain the world. Someone is betrayed, and the betrayal does not simply break trust with one person. It begins to reshape trust in an entire gender. Someone feels humiliated, unwanted, sexually invisible, emotionally used, replaced, mocked, discarded, or made to feel powerless, and the wound does not remain as a wound. It becomes a worldview. This is one of the most important things to understand about red pill consciousness. It rarely begins as pure theory. It often begins as hurt. A man may not arrive at these ideas because he sat down neutrally and examined love, gender, biology, attachment, culture, psychology, and power with full emotional distance. He may arrive there because something happened or because something kept happening. He felt ignored. He felt rejected. He felt used. He felt that kindness was not returned. He felt that emotional openness made him weak. He felt invisible to the people he desired. He felt compared to men with more status, confidence, money, physique, social power, or sexual experience. He felt that the rules he was given about being good, loyal, respectful, or emotionally available did not lead to being chosen. When that happens, pain starts asking questions. Why wasn't I enough? Why did they choose him? Why did honesty not work? Why was loyalty not valued? Why did softness make me feel disposable? Why did vulnerability become humiliation? Why does attraction seem to reward the very traits I was told not to become? These questions can be painful because they do not only ask about dating. They ask about identity. They ask whether the self is desirable, whether the self is respected, whether the self has value in the eyes of others, whether love is safe, whether goodness matters, whether vulnerability is foolish, whether the world is rigged in favor of those who perform power better. In that pain, red pill consciousness offers an answer. It says, you were not rejected because the situation was complex. You were rejected because you did not understand reality. You believed the comforting story. You believed in romance. You believed kindness was enough. You believed sincerity mattered. You believed people meant what they said. You believed attraction was fair. You believed love was moral. Now wake up. Learn the rules. Learn power. Learn status. Learn the female nature. Learn the male hierarchy. Learn the game. That can feel intoxicating to someone who is hurt. A harsh explanation can feel better than confusion. Pain hates uncertainty. The nervous system wants to know what happened, why it happened, and how to stop it from happening again. A worldview that promises to explain romantic suffering can feel regulating. It creates certainty where there was ambiguity. It creates enemies where there was helplessness. It creates rules where there was emotional chaos. It creates identity where there was shame. This is why the red pill can feel like awakening. Not necessarily because it reveals the whole truth, but because it gives the wound a language, and language is powerful, as we're discovering through each series I present to you. Through the lens of this place called Earth, and especially through the wider work on nervous system language and the mirror linguistic hypothesis, this matters deeply, because words do not merely describe a state, they can organize a state, they can regulate or dysregulate the body, they can make a person feel strong, threatened, superior, bitter, protected, awakened, or trapped. When someone says, I was hurt, that opens one kind of field. When someone says, all women are like this, that opens another. When someone says, I need to heal, that opens one possibility. When someone says, I finally know the truth, that can open another, and sometimes close everything else. The red pill language does not only explain pain, it often gives pain a posture. Stand taller. Feel colder. Trust less. Strategize more. Never be vulnerable first. Never show need. Understand leverage. Become high value. Accept the market. Stop believing the illusion. Treat love as power. Again, within that field there may be fragments that point to real issues. People do need self-respect. Boundaries matter. Attraction is not purely moral. Desire does not always reward goodness. Social status can influence make choice. Some people do manipulate. Some people do use others. Some people say one thing and respond to another. Some relationship ideals are naive. Some people have been badly misled about attraction, sexuality, and power. But a fragment of truth can become dangerous when it is fused with pain and turned into a total explanation. That is the movement from discernment into ideology. Discernment says, I have been hurt, so I need to see more clearly. Ideology says, I have been hurt, so now I know what everyone is. Discernment says, some people are unsafe. Ideology says, the category is unsafe. Discernment says, I need boundaries. Ideology says, I need armor. Discernment says, I will no longer abandon myself. Ideology says, I will never let anyone close enough to affect me. This is where pain becomes a lens. The world is no longer encountered freshly. It is filtered through a wound that now believes it is wisdom. Every interaction becomes evidence. Every rejection confirms the theory. Every inconsistency proves the narrative. Every example of selfishness becomes proof of nature. Every exception is dismissed as rare, fake, temporary, or strategic. This is not only a male issue. Women can also develop gendered worldviews from pain. A woman betrayed, manipulated, used, abandoned, abused, deceived, or repeatedly disappointed may begin to see men through a similar lens of suspicion. Men become predators, liars, emotionally stunted, dangerous, sexually selfish, avoidant, or incapable of love. Sometimes these beliefs form from genuine harm. But if the wound becomes worldview, the same pattern appears. Individuals disappear, categories take over, and protection becomes perception. This episode focuses on red pill consciousness because of its place in internet masculinity and modern dating ideology, but the deeper mechanism is humane. Pain seeks explanation. Explanation can become identity. Identity can become ideology, and ideology can prevent healing by making the wound feel intelligent. That is one of the most seductive parts of harsh truth culture. It can make bitterness feel like clarity. It can make suspicion feel like intelligence. It can make emotional closure feel like strength. It can make contempt feel like discernment. It can make a person feel superior to those who still believe in love, tenderness, vulnerability, or trust. But cynicism is not the same as wisdom. Cynicism often sees one layer clearly while refusing to see the whole. It may notice manipulation, but miss sincerity. It may notice status dynamics, but miss emotional truth. It may notice sexual strategy, but miss attachment wounds. It may notice hypocrisy, but miss complexity. It may protect against naive trust, but also block mature intimacy. That is the tragedy. The very worldview that promises to protect a person from being hurt again may also prevent them from receiving the kind of love that would help them heal. When the nervous system is organized around distrust, connection becomes threatening. Vulnerability becomes weakness. Softness becomes danger. Compassion becomes naivety. Hope becomes foolishness. Love becomes a game to win rather than a field to enter consciously. This is where red pill consciousness becomes less about truth and more about armor. Armor has a purpose. It protects the wounded place. We should not mock the person for wearing it, but armor cannot be confused with freedom. A person in armor may survive contact, but they cannot fully feel it. They may avoid certain kinds of pain, but they also restrict tenderness, openness, mutuality, and trust. So the question is not simply, is the red pill true or false? That question is too small. The deeper question is, what does this worldview do to the person holding it? Does it make them more honest or more bitter, more discerning or more suspicious, more responsible or more blaming, more capable of love or more defended against it, more compassionate or more contemptuous, more free or more dependent on the wound for identity? Because a real awakening should make perception wider, not narrower. It should increase discernment without destroying compassion. It should reveal manipulation without making every person a manipulator. It should expose fantasy without killing the possibility of love. It should help a person become stronger without needing to dehumanize those who once hurt them. This is where episode 7 begins, at the point where pain becomes a lens, and the work is to ask whether that lens helps us see more clearly, or whether it only teaches the wound how to call itself truth. The linguistic decode, red pill, awakening, truth, manipulation, and power dynamics. Before we can understand red pill consciousness, we have to slow down the language that gives it emotional force, because the red pill does not only operate through ideas, it operates through words that carry a charge. Words like awakening, truth, reality, manipulation, power, leverage, nature, value, frame, weakness, game, and strategy. These words do not simply describe relationships. They reorganize how relationships are perceived. They change the emotional posture of the person using them. They tell the nervous system whether to open, close, defend, attack, withdraw, dominate, distrust, or perform. This is why the linguistic decode matters. A person can be hurt and say, I need to understand what happened. That opens one kind of inquiry. Another person can be hurt and say, I've finally seen the truth about women, or I've finally seen the truth about men. That opens a very different field. One phrase invites examination. The other begins turning pain into a category. The first word we need to decode is the red pill itself. The phrase carries the idea of waking up from an illusion. It suggests that most people are asleep, trapped in comforting lies, unable or unwilling to see the hidden structure of reality. To take the red pill is to believe one has stepped outside the social dream and seen the machinery underneath. In relationship culture, this often means believing one has discovered the real rules beneath romance: status, sexual hierarchy, mate selection, manipulation, hypergamy, male disposability, female strategy, dominance, desirability, and power. That is why the phrase is so seductive. It does not simply say, here is a theory. It says, you were asleep, and now you are awake. It gives the person a new identity. They are no longer just wounded, confused, rejected, or angry. They are initiated. They have seen behind the curtain. They are not grieving. They are enlightened. They are not suspicious. They are realistic. They are not armored. They are informed. This is powerful because pain often wants elevation. It does not want to feel small. It does not want to admit helplessness. It does not want to sit in the rawness of rejection, longing, humiliation, or abandonment. So if pain can be transformed into awakening, the person no longer has to feel like the one who was hurt. They can feel like the one who now knows. But this is where discernment is needed. An awakening can be real. People can wake up from naive beliefs. They can wake up from social conditioning. They can realize that attraction is more complex than moral goodness. They can realize relationships involve power, biology, attachment, status, fear, projection, and unconscious drives. They can realize they were idealizing love, ignoring patterns, or abandoning themselves. That kind of awakening can be healthy. But an awakening can also become a defense. A person may say, I have woken up, when what they mean is, I have found a worldview that protects me from feeling vulnerable again. They may say, I see reality now, when what they mean is, I no longer have to risk hope. They may say, I understand women, when what they mean is, I have reduced women into a system that prevents me from seeing them as unpredictable individuals. They may say, I understand men, when what they mean is, I have turned men into a category so I do not have to risk trusting one again. This is not awakening in the deeper sense. It is closure disguised as perception. A true awakening should expand awareness. It should make a person more capable of seeing complexity, not less. It should make them more honest, not more dogmatic. It should help them notice patterns without becoming imprisoned by them. It should bring responsibility as well as insight. It should increase discernment without removing compassion. If the so-called awakening makes the world smaller, more bitter, more contemptuous, more suspicious, and less capable of love, then we have to ask whether it is awakening at all, or whether it is the nervous system finding a more sophisticated way to stay defended. The second word is truth. Red pill language often frames itself around the harsh truth, the uncomfortable truth, the brutal truth, the truth people do not want to hear. The truth hidden beneath romantic fantasy, social politeness, feminist narratives, traditional ideals, Disney stories, or cultural programming. Again, there can be real value in questioning comforting illusions. Not everything sold as love is honest. Not every romantic story is true. Not every cultural ideal prepares people for the complexity of desire, sexuality, attachment, attraction, power, and choice. But truth becomes dangerous when harshness is mistaken for accuracy. Something can feel true because it hurts. Something can feel true because it confirms a wound. Something can feel true because it gives anger a target. Something can feel true because it is delivered with certainty. Something can feel true because it explains humiliation in a way that restores pride. But emotional force is not the same as truth. This matters because red pill consciousness often treats compassion as weakness and nuance as denial. If you question the harshness, you are accused of being asleep. If you bring complexity, you are accused of avoiding reality. If you point to exceptions, you are told they do not matter. If you talk about healing, you are told you are naive. If you speak of love, you are told you still believe the illusion. But the real truth does not fear nuance. Truth does not need contempt to remain true. Truth does not need to dehumanize people to describe patterns. Truth does not need to turn every woman into an evolutionary strategy or every man into a predatory drive. Truth can hold biology and biography, desire and trauma, pattern and exception, instinct and consciousness, attraction and ethics. The deeper issue is that the harsh truth can become emotionally addictive. It gives a rush of clarity. It feels clean, strong, decisive. It cuts through confusion. But it may also cut away the softer forms of understanding that healing requires. It may give the mind certainty while keeping the heart closed. A better question is not, is this harsh enough to be true? It is, does this truth make me more whole? Does it increase responsibility? Does it increase discernment? Does it make me more capable of seeing individuals clearly? Does it help me protect myself without becoming contemptuous? Does it help me understand my own part in patterns? Does it help me remain open to love where love is real? Or does it simply make the wound more articulate? The third word is manipulation. In red pill spaces, manipulation often appears in two ways. First, as something people fear being subjected to. Second, as something they learn to use in return. A person may take the red pill because they feel manipulated. They feel they were lied to, used, exploited, emotionally played, sexually rejected, financially drained, humiliated, or treated as disposable. They begin searching for the hidden rules so they will not be fooled again. This desire makes sense. Nobody wants to feel naive after being hurt. Nobody wants to keep repeating patterns that leave them wounded. But if trust collapses completely, manipulation can start to look like intelligence. Instead of learning to communicate honestly, a person learns to manage frames. Instead of learning to set boundaries, they learn to create distance. Instead of learning to be vulnerable with discernment, they learn to withhold. Instead of learning to recognize unsafe people, they learn to assume everyone is unsafe. Instead of developing relational maturity, they develop tactics. This is how pain can turn a person into what they fear. They were hurt by manipulation, so they learned manipulation as protection. They were hurt by emotional uncertainty, so they create uncertainty in others. They were wounded by powerlessness, so they seek leverage. They were humiliated by need, so they punish need wherever it appears. They were made to feel disposable, so they make others feel disposable first. This is not healing. It is the wound becoming method. Manipulation appears when direct vulnerability no longer feels safe. If I cannot say what I want, I create pressure. If I cannot admit I care, I act indifferent. If I cannot risk rejection, I make the other person chase. If I cannot tolerate uncertainty, I control the field. If I cannot trust love, I turn love into strategy. This does not mean all strategies are manipulative. Boundaries are not manipulation. Discernment is not manipulation. Taking time is not manipulation. Refusing to overgive is not manipulation. Not rushing intimacy is not manipulation. But when the aim becomes controlling another person's perception, emotion, insecurity, jealousy, availability, or attachment in order to maintain power, then relating has been replaced by influence. This connects directly to the wider work of the resonance matrix and the mirror linguistic hypothesis. Language, tone, timing, silence, implication, withdrawal, pressure, and framing can all shape nervous system state. They can regulate or destabilize. They can create safety or uncertainty. They can invite truth or produce compliance. In relationships, this matters deeply because intimate language is not neutral. It can become medicine or it can become leverage. The fourth phrase is power dynamics. Red pill consciousness often sees relationships through power. Who has options? Who has leverage? Who wants less? Who cares less? Who controls access? Who is replaceable? Who is desired? Who is chasing? Who is being used? Who has sexual value? Who has emotional dependence? Who holds the frame? There is some truth in recognizing power dynamics. Relationships are not free from power. Desire can create imbalance. Beauty can create leverage. Money can create leverage. Attention can create leverage. Emotional dependence can create leverage. Sexual access can create leverage. Social status can create leverage. The person who cares less may seem to hold more power because they risk less. But when power becomes the central lens, love begins to deform. The person is no longer asking, "Can I meet you?" They are asking, "Where do I stand?" They are no longer asking, "What is true between us?" They are asking, "Who has the advantage?" They are no longer asking, "Can I trust this connection?" They are asking, "How do I avoid losing power?" That shift may protect against naivety, but it also makes intimacy almost impossible, because intimacy requires some willingness to be affected. It requires the risk of sincerity. It requires communication that is not always strategic. It requires the capacity to let another person matter without immediately interpreting that as weakness. Power dynamics become especially dangerous when need is treated as inferiority. If needing someone means losing power, then love itself becomes threatening. If caring means being vulnerable to manipulation, then tenderness becomes dangerous. If emotional investment means lower status, then the person who loves more is seen as losing. This turns relationships into contests of controlled attachment. Who can appear less affected? Who can withhold longer? Who can make the other person seek reassurance? Who can leave first? Who can make vulnerability feel unsafe? This may create drama, but it does not create conscious love. A healthier understanding of power would not deny imbalance. It would ask how power can be held ethically. It would ask how two people can remain sovereign without manipulating each other. It would ask how desire can coexist with respect. It would ask how boundaries can protect without dehumanizing. It would ask how strength can be used to create safety, not fear. The fifth word is nature. Red pill discourse often appeals to nature, female nature, male nature, evolutionary nature, sexual nature, and biological reality. This language can be compelling because biology matters. We are embodied beings. Attraction has biological dimensions. Mate selection is not purely rational. Hormones, fertility cues, status, youth, strength, resources, beauty, confidence, sexuality, and reproductive strategies may all influence desire in different ways. But the word nature becomes dangerous when it is used to imprison people inside crude categories. To say biology influences behavior is not the same as saying biology determines destiny. To say patterns exist is not the same as saying every individual is reducible to the pattern. To say attraction has evolutionary dimensions is not the same as saying consciousness, ethics, culture, maturity, and choice are irrelevant. When someone says that is just female nature, or that is just male nature, the phrase often ends inquiry rather than deepens it. It turns a complex human being into a predictable mechanism. It makes contempt feel scientific. It can excuse cynicism, manipulation, or emotional withdrawal because the other person is no longer encountered as a person. They are encountered as an example of the category. A more mature view would say, yes, biology participates, but so do trauma, attachment, culture, language, family systems, personal values, nervous system state, self-awareness, spiritual development, and conscious choice. We are not less than biology, but we also not only biology. This brings us to the final phrase, power disguised as healing. Much of red pill consciousness presents itself as self-improvement. Become stronger, get fit, build status, stop chasing, develop discipline, make money, respect yourself, stop being used. Do not abandon yourself. These can be useful messages. There is nothing wrong with a man becoming healthier, more disciplined, more confident, more boundaried, more purposeful, and less dependent on external validation. But self-improvement becomes distorted when the emotional fuel is resentment. If the deeper aim is to become powerful enough to punish those who once rejected you, then improvement remains tied to the wound. If discipline is built on hatred of vulnerability, then the person may become harder but not freer. If status is pursued only to reverse humiliation, then the old humiliation remains the hidden center of the identity. Healing asks for more than becoming harder to hurt. It asks for becoming more whole. That means reclaiming agency without losing compassion, building boundaries without becoming contemptuous, developing strength without exiling tenderness, understanding attraction without reducing people to strategies, seeing manipulation without becoming manipulative, learning from pain without turning pain into a religion. When we bring these words together, red pill, awakening, truth, manipulation, power dynamics, nature, and self-improvement, we can see how the language works. It gives pain a structure. It gives shame a posture. It gives rejection an explanation. It gives loneliness a community. It gives distrust a vocabulary. It gives the wounded self a way to feel powerful again. The same language can also trap the person inside the very wound it claims to solve. So the linguistic question beneath this episode is simple. Does this language open perception or close it? Does it help me see more clearly, or does it teach me to see everyone through suspicion? Does it restore agency, or does it make me dependent on resentment? Does it help me heal, or does it only make the wound sound intelligent? Because language does not merely describe consciousness. It can become the architecture consciousness that lives inside. The scientific and psychological layer rejection, threat systems, and cognitive bias red pill consciousness often presents itself as rational analysis. But beneath the language of truth, nature, hierarchy, strategy, and power, there is usually a nervous system trying to protect itself from being hurt again. That does not mean every claim made inside these spaces is automatically false. It means the emotional state beneath the claim matters. A person can notice real patterns and still interpret those patterns through pain. A person can identify real manipulation and still become manipulative in response. A person can learn something about attraction, status, sexual behavior, or relational dynamics and still build a worldview that keeps them trapped in distrust. So the scientific and psychological layer begins with a simple recognition. Rejection is not a small thing to the human nervous system. Romantic rejection can feel devastating because it touches several layers at once. It touches belonging. It touches self-worth. It touches sexuality. It touches identity. It touches the body's need to be wanted, chosen, recognized, and valued. When someone is rejected by a person they desire, it is rarely experienced as neutral information. It can feel like evidence. Evidence that they are not attractive enough, not powerful enough, not masculine enough, not feminine enough, not interesting enough, not valuable enough, not lovable enough. Once rejection becomes evidence of the self, the wound deepens. The person is not only grieving the loss of a connection, they are grieving what the rejection seems to say about them. This is where shame enters. Shame says, something is wrong with me. It does not simply say, that person did not choose me. It says, I am the kind of person who is not chosen. That is a completely different nervous system reality. From there, the mind begins searching for protection. If rejection has hurt this deeply, the system wants to prevent the same pain from happening again. It begins scanning. It looks for patterns. It looks for rules. It looks for reasons. It looks for causes. It asks, what did I miss? What did I do wrong? What do they want? What makes someone desirable? What makes someone disposable? What makes someone powerful? What makes someone safe from humiliation? This search can become healthy if it leads to self-awareness. A person may learn boundaries, confidence, communication, discernment, self-respect, emotional regulation, and better partner selection. But the same search can become distorted if it is led by a threat. When the nervous system is under threat, it does not primarily want truth. It wants safety. That is an important distinction. A threatened nervous system will often prefer an explanation that feels protective over one that is fully nuanced. It may prefer certainty over complexity. It may prefer blame over grief. It may prefer rules over vulnerability. It may prefer control over trust. It may prefer suspicion over the risk of hope. This is where red pill consciousness can become psychologically appealing. It gives the threatened system a map. It says, here are the rules. Here is the hierarchy. Here is what women do. Here is what men do. Here is what you were not told. Here is why you were hurt. Here is how never to be weak again. That kind of explanation can regulate pain in the short term. It can turn confusion into certainty. It can turn shame into anger. It can turn helplessness into strategy. It can turn rejection into motivation. It can make the person feel less lost. If the explanation is built around threat, it may keep the body in threat. The person may feel stronger, but more guarded, more informed, but less open, more strategic, but less trusting, more powerful, but more isolated. The system is protected, but it is also constantly scanning for the next betrayal, the next rejection, the next manipulation, the next proof that the worldview is correct. This brings us to threat detection. When someone has been hurt, their nervous system may become sensitized to similar patterns. If they were betrayed, they may begin looking for betrayal. If they were rejected, they may begin looking for signs of rejection before rejection happens. If they were humiliated, they may become extremely sensitive to disrespect. If they were used, they may begin interpreting requests, vulnerability, or emotional need as attempts to exploit them. If they felt sexually inadequate, they may become highly sensitive to comparison, competition, status, and desirability. This is understandable. The nervous system is trying to learn from pain. It is trying to prevent repetition. But threat detection can easily become over-detection. The system starts seeing danger everywhere because danger has once arrived somewhere important. In relationships, this can create a cycle. The person expects manipulation, so they behave defensively. Their defensive behavior creates distance. The distance confirms that people cannot be trusted. They then become more defensive. Their worldview appears confirmed, but part of what is being confirmed is the relational field created by the defense itself. For example, if a man believes women only respond to status and dominance, he may begin performing status and dominance. This may attract certain kinds of attention while repelling other kinds of connection. He may then use the attention he attracts as proof that his worldview is correct, while ignoring the people who might have responded to a more integrated version of him. His belief does not merely observe reality, it begins selecting which reality he participates in. The same can happen in reverse. If someone believes men are always dangerous, selfish, or emotionally dishonest, they may interpret ambiguity as a threat, kindness as a strategy, desire as predation, and conflict as proof of character. Some caution may be justified, especially after harm. But if every man is filtered through the wound, then genuine difference becomes difficult to perceive. This is where cognitive bias becomes central. Confirmation bias is the tendency to notice, remember, and value evidence that confirms what we already believe, while dismissing or minimizing evidence that challenges it. In red pill consciousness, this can become extremely powerful. If someone believes women only want high-status men, they will notice examples that support that claim. If they believe men only want sex, they will notice examples that support that claim. If they believe nice men finish last, they will collect stories that prove it. If they believe vulnerability loses power, they will remember every moment vulnerability was punished and ignore every moment it created closeness. The belief becomes a filter. Once a belief becomes a filter, reality begins to look like the belief. This does not mean the person is inventing everything. They may be noticing real behaviors. Some people are status-driven. Some people are manipulative. Some people do exploit kindness. Some people do deceive, use, discard, betray, or rank others. The issue is not that the examples are entirely false. The issue is when the examples are used to define the whole. Pain says, this happened. Ideology says, this is how they are. That movement from event to category is where distortion begins. The mind also tends to protect identity. If a person has built a self-image around being awake, realistic, strong, and no longer naive, then evidence against that worldview may feel threatening. It is not just information. It threatens the identity that has protected them from shame. To question the ideology may feel like returning to vulnerability. It may feel like becoming the naive person again. It may feel like betraying the part of the self that survived by hardening. So the worldview defends itself. Exceptions are dismissed. Nuance is treated as a weakness. Compassion is treated as denial. People who disagree are called asleep, naive, manipulated, emotional, or unwilling to face reality. The belief system becomes self-sealing. Anything that confirms it is evidence. Anything that challenges it is proof that the challenger has not awakened. This is not unique to red pill spaces. It is how many ideologies protect themselves. But in relationships, the damage is intimate because the belief system shapes how people approach love, vulnerability, trust, sexuality, and human connection. Cynicism plays a major role here. Cynicism can feel like intelligence after pain. It seems sharper than hope. It seems more mature than innocence. It seems safer than trust. The cynical person says, I know how people really are. And because cynicism expects disappointment, it can feel less vulnerable than longing. If I expect betrayal, I am not surprised by betrayal. If I expect rejection, I can pretend I chose detachment first. If I expect manipulation, I can stay guarded. If I expect love to fail, then hope cannot humiliate me. In that sense, cynicism is emotional armor. It protects against the shock of being hurt, but it also protects against the possibility of being met. It may prevent naive trust, but it can also prevent mature trust. It may keep the person from being fooled, but it can also keep the person from being loved. The nervous system may experience this armor as safety, but over time, it can become isolation. The person becomes harder to hurt, but also harder to reach. They become less naive, but also less receptive. They become less likely to collapse, but also less able to soften. They may feel in control, but the control is built around avoiding pain rather than opening to truth. This is why the nervous system behind ideology matters. A worldview can regulate the body. It can provide certainty. It can provide belonging. It can provide rules. It can provide enemies. It can explain. It can provide a sense of superiority. It can provide identity. It can provide direction. For a person in pain, all of that can feel stabilizing. But regulation is not the same as healing. A belief system can calm the person while also narrowing them. It can reduce anxiety while increasing contempt. It can make the person feel strong while preventing grief from being processed. It can give them community while bonding them to resentment. It can organize chaos while making love impossible. This is where we have to ask what the ideology costs. Does it allow the person to grieve? Does it allow them to take responsibility? Does it allow them to notice exceptions? Does it allow them to meet individuals as individuals? Does it allow them to remain open to a healthy relationship? Does it allow them to admit fear, shame, tenderness, longing, and need? Or does it require them to convert every vulnerable feeling into strategy, superiority, or blame? If the worldview cannot allow grief, then the wound remains active. If it cannot allow tenderness, then the heart remains defended. If it cannot allow nuance, then perception remains narrowed. If it cannot allow responsibility, then growth becomes limited. And if it cannot allow love, then it may protect the person from rejection by protecting them from connection itself. Rejection, threat detection, and cognitive bias create a loop. First, pain occurs. Then the nervous system searches for protection. Then a belief system explains. Then the mind begins collecting evidence. Then the body feels safer inside the belief. Then any challenge to the belief feels unsafe. Then the person becomes more invested in the worldview, because the worldview now regulates their pain. This is why it can be so hard to argue someone out of red pill consciousness. You are not only debating ideas, you are touching a defense structure. You are touching the system that helped them survive humiliation, loneliness, rejection, or betrayal. If you attack the belief without understanding the wound, the person may cling harder to the belief because the belief is acting like armor. That does not mean harmful ideas should be excused. It means we need to understand why they grip people so strongly. Underneath contempt, there may be grief. Underneath dominance fantasies, there may be shame. Underneath hatred, there may be humiliation. Underneath manipulation, there may be terror of being powerless. Underneath, I know the truth, there may be a person who could not bear the uncertainty of being hurt without explanation. This is where healing has to go deeper than debate. A person does not leave a worldview like this simply by being told they are wrong. They leave when they no longer need the worldview to regulate their wound. They leave when they can feel rejection without turning it into hatred. They leave when they can recognize patterns without turning people into categories. They leave when they can build boundaries without contempt. They leave when they can grieve what happened without organizing an entire identity around it. This is not easy, because grief is softer than ideology. Responsibility is harder than blame. Discernment is more complex than suspicion. Real confidence takes longer than performance. Real healing is less immediately satisfying than harsh certainty, but it is also freer, because when pain is metabolized, perception widens. The person can see unsafe people without believing everyone is unsafe. They can see status dynamics without reducing love to hierarchy. They can recognize manipulation without becoming manipulative. They can protect themselves without closing their hearts completely. They can learn from rejection without making rejection the center of identity. This is the psychological turning point. The question is no longer, how do I never get hurt again? That question will always lead towards armor. The deeper question is, how do I become discerning, grounded, and whole enough that being hurt does not turn me against life? That is a different path. It does not deny the pain. It does not pretend rejection is easy. It does not romanticize vulnerability without boundaries. It does not ask people to become naive. It asks for something more difficult, the ability to stay human after being hurt. Because red pill consciousness may begin as protection from pain, But if the protection becomes total, it becomes a prison, and the body that wanted safety may end up living inside suspicion. The mind that wants truth may end up living inside bias. The heart that wanted love may end up calling its closure wisdom. So the work is to return to the wound before it became ideology, to ask what happened, what hurt, what was lost, what felt humiliating, what belief formed in that moment, what category replaced the person, what armor became identity. Only then can the nervous system begin to learn a different truth, not the naive truth that love never hurts, not the cynical truth that love is only a strategy, but the deeper truth is that pain can teach discernment without becoming hatred, that boundaries can exist without contempt, that strength can exist without closure, and that the heart can become wiser without becoming deadened. The mirror layer, what red pill consciousness reveals. If red pill consciousness is often a nervous system response to pain, then the mirror layer asks a deeper question. What does this worldview reveal about the person who holds it? Because ideology rarely feels like a mirror from the inside. From the inside, it feels like reality. It feels like the world has finally become clear. It feels as though the person has moved beyond illusion and now sees the hidden machinery of attraction, gender, status, power, and desire. But often, what appears to be a worldview about the opposite sex is also a reflection of the self that was wounded in relation to them. This is where the red pill becomes psychologically revealing. It not only reveals beliefs about women, dating, masculinity, status, and power. It reveals the rejected self, the humiliated self, the betrayed self, the unwanted self, and the part of the person that still does not know how to grieve without turning grief into certainty. The first mirror is the rejected self. Beneath a lot of resentment is a very simple wound. I wanted to be chosen, and I wasn't. That sentence may sound too soft compared with the language of red pill spaces, but it is often closer to the emotional truth. Someone wanted to matter to another person. They wanted to be desired. They wanted to be seen. They wanted their loyalty, kindness, effort, humor, intelligence, emotional availability, physical presence, or devotion to mean something. They wanted the person they wanted to want them back. When that did not happen, something in the self felt exposed. Rejection can be brutal because it not only denies access to the other person, it seems to reflect something about the self. You are not enough. You are not chosen. You are not wanted in the way you want to be wanted. Someone else is more desirable. Your feelings do not change the outcome. That can be a deeply destabilizing mirror. So the wounded person may try to break the mirror by turning away from grief and towards explanation. Instead of saying, I am hurt because I wanted to be chosen, the worldview says women only choose status, or men are only valued for what they provide, or kindness is useless, or love is a game, or I was lied to about attraction. Some of those statements may contain fragments worth examining, but the emotional movement matters. The person has moved from grief into theory, from the wound of not being chosen into a system that explains why being chosen was never innocent in the first place. This protects the rejected self from feeling the full simplicity of the pain. The second mirror is the humiliated self. Humiliation is different from sadness. Sadness says, I lost something. Humiliation says, I was made small. It has a social component. It is not only that something hurt, it is that the self felt lowered, exposed, compared, mocked, discarded, or made inferior in the eyes of another. A man who feels humiliated may not only want healing, he may want a reversal, he may want power, he may want to become someone who can never be laughed at, ignored, rejected, or looked down upon again. This is where dominance fantasies can become very seductive. The fantasy is not only about being attractive, it is about becoming untouchable. If humiliation once said, you are beneath, the fantasy says, I will rise above. If rejection once said, you are not wanted, the fantasy says, I will become the one who chooses. If vulnerability once led to shame, the fantasy says, I will never reveal vulnerability again. This is where the language of alpha, value, dominance, options, leverage, and control can become emotionally powerful. It offers the humiliated self a way to recover pride. It says, you were hurt because you lacked power. Gain power, and this cannot happen again. But if power is built only as protection from humiliation, it remains bound to humiliation. The person may become more disciplined, more confident, more socially strategic, more physically impressive, or more sexually successful, but the original wound may still be governing the project. The self has not been freed. It has been reorganized around never feeling small again. That is why some forms of red pill confidence can feel brittle. They look strong until they are questioned. They look calm until vulnerability appears. They look certain until someone threatens their identity. Underneath the certainty may be a nervous system still terrified of being humiliated. The third mirror is the betrayed self. Betrayal changes perception because it damages trust. If someone trusted and was deceived, opened and was used, loved and was discarded, believed words that were later contradicted by behavior, then the mind may begin scanning for hidden motives. It may decide that direct trust is foolish. It may be concluded that everyone is performing, everyone is manipulating, and everyone is playing a game. Again, this is understandable. Betrayal teaches the body that appearances cannot be trusted. The person begins asking, what is really happening beneath what is being said? That question can be healthy if it leads to discernment, but it becomes dangerous when suspicion becomes the default lens. The betrayed self may start seeing manipulation everywhere. A woman's affection becomes a strategy, a man's desire becomes predation, kindness becomes leverage. Vulnerability becomes a trap. Emotional need becomes exploitation. The individual disappears behind the anticipated betrayal. The red pill worldview can feel like protection here because it offers the betrayed self a way to never be naive again. It says, do not trust words, watch behavior, learn incentives, understand power, assume hidden motives, protect yourself. Some of that can be useful. Behavior does matter, incentives matter, boundaries matter. But if distrust becomes total, the person no longer sees clearly. They see through injury. They may become so focused on avoiding deception that they cannot recognize sincerity when it appears. This is one of the great tragedies of betrayal. The wound wants to prevent future pain, but it may also block future intimacy. The person says, I see through people now, but sometimes what they are seeing through is the lens of the person who hurt them. The fourth mirror is the unwanted self. This is often the deepest wound beneath sexual marketplace language. The language may sound analytical, value, options, leverage, mate choice, status, desirability, but underneath there may be the ache of feeling sexually invisible, unwanted, replaceable, or beneath consideration. To feel unwanted romantically or sexually can cut deeply into identity. It can make a person feel as if their body, presence, personality, masculinity, femininity, age, status, income, attractiveness, or social confidence has been judged and found lacking. That wound is hard to hold, so the mind may turn it into a system. Instead of saying, I feel unwanted, and that hurts, it says, the sexual marketplace works like this. Instead of saying, I feel invisible, it says, only high-status men are desired. Instead of saying, I feel replaceable, it says, women always optimize. Instead of saying, I am frightened that I am not enough, it says, this is just evolutionary reality. Again, there may be patterns in the world worth analyzing. Attraction is not equally distributed. Beauty, confidence, status, youth, resources, social proof, and other factors can influence desire. But when analysis becomes a shield against feeling unwanted, it may keep the person from touching the deeper wound, because the unwanted self does not only need a theory, it needs dignity, it needs to grieve, it needs to recover worth beyond sexual validation, it needs to build self-respect without turning desire into hatred, it needs to become more whole, not merely more competitive. It needs to learn that being unwanted by one person, or even by many, is painful, but it is not a final verdict on the soul. The fifth mirror is the projection onto women or men as categories. When pain is not metabolized, it often expands. The person who hurt us becomes the category. The woman who rejected me becomes a collective noun of women. The man who used me becomes men. The partner who betrayed me becomes proof of nature. The dating pattern becomes evidence of a universal law. This is where the mirror becomes distorted. Instead of seeing the individual, the wounded person sees the category. Instead of asking, what happened here, they ask, why are they all like this? Instead of grieving one person, they indict a whole gender. Instead of processing the wound, they export it into a social theory. This is dangerous because categories do not need to be known. They can be judged from a distance. Once someone becomes a category, compassion becomes easier to withdraw. It becomes easier to speak with contempt, easier to justify manipulation, easier to stop listening, easier to reduce another human being to a pattern. This is how dehumanization begins in relational culture. Not always through explicit hatred at first, but through repeated abstraction. Women become hypergamous, men become predators, love becomes leverage, desire becomes market selection, vulnerability becomes weakness, the person disappears behind the model. But conscious relating requires the return of the individual. It requires the capacity to say, yes, patterns exist, but this person is not merely a pattern. Yes, I have been hurt, but this person is not automatically the one who hurt me. Yes, I need discernment, but discernment is not the same as contempt. Yes, I must protect myself, but protection does not require dehumanization. The mirror layer of red pill consciousness, therefore, asks a very uncomfortable question. What part of the worldview is actually a wound speaking in a universal language? What part of truth is grief that has not been felt? What part of strategy is fear of being powerless again? What part of female nature or male nature is one person's pain projected onto millions? What part of I am awake is actually I cannot bear to be vulnerable again? This does not mean the person should be shamed for having pain. Quite the opposite. The pain needs to be respected enough to be heard directly. The rejected self needs to speak without turning into resentment. The humiliated self needs to recover dignity without domination. The betrayed self needs to regain discernment without total suspicion. The unwanted self needs to rebuild worth without hatred. The wounded heart needs to be protected but not imprisoned. When pain is not allowed to be pain, it often becomes ideology. And once it becomes ideology, it becomes harder to heal, because the wound now believes it is perception. This is why red pill consciousness can be so difficult to leave. To leave it may feel like losing protection. It may feel like returning to naivety. It may feel like surrendering the only explanation that made the pain bearable. But the deeper truth is that healing does not require naivety. It requires more honesty, not less. It asks the person to see the world clearly, but also to see themselves clearly, to see patterns without becoming possessed by them, to see manipulation without becoming manipulative, to see desire without reducing love to ranking, to see gendered wounds without turning gender into an enemy, to see pain without making pain the ruler of consciousness. The mirror is not there to accuse. It is there to reveal, and what it reveals is that behind many harsh worldviews is a part of the self that still needs compassion, not indulgence, not permission to harm, not agreement with bitterness, but compassion in the deeper sense, the willingness to understand what happened before the wound became a weapon. The red pill mirror does not only show gender narratives, it shows the places where love hurt so deeply that suspicion began calling itself truth. Cultural and digital conditioning. The algorithm of relational distrust. If the red pill mirror shows how personal pain can become a worldview, the cultural layer shows how that worldview is amplified, repeated, monetized, and made to feel more real through digital systems. Because very few people now arrive at relational beliefs in isolation. They do not simply have an experience, sit quietly with it, reflect, grieve, speak with wise people, and slowly form a mature understanding. Instead, pain often meets the internet almost immediately. A breakup happens, a rejection happens, a humiliation happens, a betrayal happens, and within minutes, a person can search for answers inside a machine built to reward emotional intensity. The person types in a question that may begin innocently enough. Why did she lose interest? Why do men pull away? Why do women choose bad men? Why do men only want one thing? How do I stop being needy? How do I become more attractive? Why was I used? Why do nice guys finish last? Why do I keep attracting avoidant people? The algorithm answers, not with wisdom necessarily, with engagement. That distinction matters. The algorithm is not a therapist, elder, philosopher, mentor, or emotionally mature friend. It does not care whether the person becomes more whole. It cares about what keeps attention active, and pain is active. Anger is active. Shame is active. Suspicion is active. Outrage is active. Humiliation is active. Certainty is active. Content that gives a wounded person a target can feel like relief, and because it feels relieving, the person watches more. The platform notices. Then it gives them more of the same. This is how the content pipeline begins. A man may start with dating advice and slowly be shown more extreme material about female nature, hypergamy, sexual hierarchy, alpha dominance, male disposability, manipulation, and why vulnerability makes men weak. A woman may start with heartbreak content and be shown more material about narcissistic men, avoidant men, toxic masculinity, emotional unavailability, weaponized incompetence, and why men cannot be trusted. In both cases, the field narrows. The person may believe they are researching reality, but the platform is also shaping what reality begins to look like. This does not mean every piece of content is wrong. Some of it names real patterns. Some people do manipulate. Some people are emotionally unavailable. Some people are cruel, selfish, exploitative, avoidant, deceptive, status-driven, or sexually opportunistic. The problem is not that the internet contains no truth. The problem is that it often strips truth from proportion, context, compassion, and self-inquiry. A single pattern becomes the whole gender. A painful experience becomes universal law. A useful warning becomes a permanent suspicion. A personal wound becomes a cultural identity. That is the algorithm of relational distrust. It not only tells people to be careful, it teaches them to expect betrayal. It not only encourages boundaries, it teaches them to build armor. It not only names manipulation, it can make manipulation appear inevitable. It does not only exposes harmful behavior, it can make contempt feel like intelligence. Contempt is very engaging. Content that humiliates men or women, ranks them, mocks them, exposes them, or reduces them to predictable drives creates a strong emotional reaction. It makes people angry. It makes them defensive. It makes them feel superior. It makes them feel seen in their resentment. It gives them a group to belong to and a group to oppose. It gives pain a social identity. That is why gender war content spreads so easily. It simplifies complexity into sides. Men are like this. Women are like that. Dating is war. Love is leverage. Marriage is a trap. Vulnerability is weakness. Emotional availability is of low value. Desire is manipulation. Loyalty is naive. People are either predators or fools. If you are hurt, it is because you did not understand the game. This kind of content can feel empowering at first because it replaces helplessness with explanation. But it often creates a deeper dependency. The person keeps returning to the same material to regulate the same wound. They are not healing the pain. They are feeding it with language, examples, clips, arguments, and confirmation. The marketplace of pain is extremely profitable. Creators can sell certainty to the confused, superiority to the humiliated, strategy to the anxious, revenge fantasy to the rejected, and emotional armor to the betrayed. They can turn heartbreak into a course, loneliness into a funnel, masculinity into a product, femininity into a brand, trauma language into identity, and distrust into community. They can tell people they are waking up while keeping them emotionally activated enough to keep watching. This is not unique to one side of the gender divide. There are male spaces that monetize resentment towards women, and there are female spaces that monetize fear or contempt towards men. The tone may differ, the vocabulary may differ, the wounds may differ, but the mechanism is similar. Take pain, give it an enemy, offer a language, build a community, and keep attention returning. The danger is that the person begins to confuse being validated with being healed. Validation says, your pain makes sense. Healing asks, what will you do with it? Validation can be necessary. People need to know they are not mad for feeling hurt. But if validation never moves towards responsibility, grief, embodiment, self-reflection, boundaries, or renewed capacity for love, it becomes a loop. The wound is affirmed again and again, but not transformed. This is where online ideology becomes emotionally sticky. It gives people belonging. Someone who felt isolated suddenly finds thousands of others saying, "Yes, this happened to me too. Yes, they are like this. Yes, you were lied to. Yes, you must never trust again." The person feels less alone, but the belonging is built around a shared wound. Community forms, but often through resentment rather than integration. Once a community forms around a wound, leaving the worldview can feel like betrayal. If someone begins to soften, question, or see nuance, they may be accused of becoming naive again. If they admit that not all women or men fit the model, they may be told they are asleep. If they talk about compassion, they may be mocked. If they seek healing rather than strategy, they may be seen as weak. The ideology protects itself by shaming the person's return to complexity. This is how advice becomes identity. At first, someone may only want to stop being hurt. They want better boundaries, clearer perception, more confidence, and more self-respect. But after enough content, they may begin to see themselves as part of a movement, a tribe, a truth class. They are no longer just someone learning from pain. They are someone who has seen reality. The worldview becomes part of who they are. When a belief becomes identity, it becomes harder to question. This is why relational distrust can become algorithmically reinforced. The platform feeds the belief filters perception, perception confirms the content, and the content strengthens the identity. A person who believes women only want status will notice every clip that confirms it. A person who believes men are emotionally dangerous will notice every story that confirms it. The feed becomes a mirror, but not a clear mirror. It reflects the wound repeatedly until the wound begins to look like the world. This connects directly to the wider ethos of this place called Earth. Perception is not passive. What we repeatedly consume becomes part of what we expect. What we expect shapes what we notice. What we notice shapes what we believe. What we believe shapes how we behave. And how we behave shapes the relationships we then use as evidence. This is a loop. If someone expects manipulation, they may communicate with suspicion. Suspicion may create defensiveness. Defensiveness may create distance. Distance may confirm the belief that people cannot be trusted. The person then returns to the content that explains why distance was inevitable. The worldview becomes self-reinforcing. This is why the algorithm does not merely reflect relational pain. It can organize pain into a closed perceptual system. It can make love seem more dangerous than it is. It can make trust seem more foolish than it is. It can make whole genders appear more predictable, cruel, shallow, or manipulative than they are. It can take individual wounds and convert them into cultural certainty. Perhaps the most tragic part is that many people caught in these systems still want love. They may speak with contempt. They may mock vulnerability. They may perform detachment. They may claim they see through romance. But underneath, many still want to be chosen, respected, desired, held, understood, safe, and seen. The ideology does not erase the longing. It armors it. That is why red pill consciousness cannot be understood only as hate or stupidity. It has to be understood as pain, language, platform, identity, and nervous system regulation interacting together. This does not excuse harmful behavior. It does not excuse misogyny, manipulation, cruelty, or dehumanization, but it helps explain why these beliefs become so gripping. The algorithm does not heal relational pain. It often organizes it into sides. Once people are organized into sides, love becomes much harder. The person across from us is no longer simply a human being with history, complexity, wounds, desires, fears, and capacity. They become an example of women, an example of men, an example of danger, an example of a strategy, an example of why we must remain guarded. But conscious love requires the opposite movement. It asks us to return from category to person, from ideology to encounter, from content to embodiment, from suspicion to discernment, from rage to grief, from performance to presence, from the algorithmic field back to the relational field. The internet may be able to feed the wound endlessly, but it cannot love us back. It can explain pain, amplify pain, validate pain, monetize pain, and connect us with others carrying similar pain. But it cannot do the inner work for us. It cannot grieve for us. It cannot soften the heart without our participation. It cannot teach us to meet another human being clearly if we keep allowing it to show us only the evidence of distrust. So the cultural question becomes, what is training my perception of love? Is it lived experience, reflected upon with honesty? Is it a mature conversation? Is it embodied discernment? Or is it a stream of wounded certainty delivered through a machine that profits from my activation? That question matters because once we see the algorithm of relational distrust, we can begin to step out of it, not into naivety, not into blind trust, not into pretending harm does not happen, but into a wider field of perception where pain is allowed to teach us without becoming the only teacher. When the feed becomes the lens, people become categories, and when people become categories, love loses the space where truth can actually meet us. The phenomenological and spiritual layer, false awakening, armor and the closed heart, the red pill often presents itself as awakening. That is part of its power. It does not usually say, you are wounded, and this is one way to protect yourself from feeling that wound again. It says, you were asleep and now you see. It tells the person that the pain they have carried was not just pain, it was initiation. It tells them the bitterness they feel is not bitterness, it is clarity. It tells them the closure of the heart is not closure, it is intelligence. And this is where the spiritual layer becomes important, because not every awakening opens consciousness. Some awakenings close it. A true awakening should make a person more capable of seeing reality, not less. It should widen perception. It should increase compassion without removing discernment. It should allow someone to recognize manipulation without becoming manipulative, recognize danger without seeing danger everywhere, and recognize patterns without turning people into categories. It should help a person become more truthful, more responsible, more present, and more able to hold complexity. But a false awakening often does the opposite. It narrows the field. It replaces uncertainty with certainty too quickly. It gives pain an enemy. It makes contempt feel like wisdom. It turns the wound into a throne and says, "From here you can see clearly." That is not clarity. That is armor. Armor is understandable. When someone has been hurt, betrayed, rejected, humiliated, or made to feel disposable, it makes sense that the heart would close. The heart does not close because it is evil. It closes because openness once felt dangerous. It closes because softness was not protected. It closes because vulnerability became a place where someone else had too much power. It closes because the nervous system learned that hope can lead to humiliation. So we do not begin by mocking the armor. We begin by understanding why it formed. The problem is not the first closing. Sometimes closing is necessary. Sometimes distance protects. Sometimes anger helps a person leave what is unsafe. Sometimes distrust is the first step away from naivety. Sometimes the body needs to say never again before it can even begin to recover. The problem comes when armor becomes identity. When the person no longer says, "I closed because I was hurt," they say, "This is the truth of love." They no longer say, "I need boundaries." They say, "Vulnerability is weakness." They no longer say, "I need to heal my discernment." They say, "Trust is for fools." They no longer say, "I was betrayed." They say, "They are all like this." The wound becomes doctrine. This is how the closed heart can disguise itself as wisdom. It speaks with certainty. It sees danger quickly. It notices manipulation. It remembers betrayal. It knows how to protect itself. But protection is not the same as freedom. A closed heart may avoid certain kinds of pain, but it also loses access to certain kinds of life. It may prevent humiliation, but it can also prevent tenderness. It may avoid betrayal, but it can also avoid intimacy. It may reject naivety, but it can also reject wonder. Perhaps that is one of the deeper tragedies of red pill consciousness. It often begins with a person wanting to stop being fooled, but ends with a person becoming unable to receive what is real. Because if every act of kindness is interpreted as a strategy, kindness cannot land. If every expression of affection is interpreted as leverage, affection cannot be trusted. If every vulnerability is interpreted as a weakness, vulnerability cannot become intimacy. If every woman or man is interpreted through a category, no individual can arrive. The heart remains defended not only against harm, but against connection. This is where shadow masculinity and shadow femininity enter the conversation, not as rigid gender boxes, but as symbolic patterns of wounded energy. Shadow masculinity may appear as control, domination, contempt, conquest, emotional suppression, withdrawal, aggression, punishment, or the need to win every relational exchange. Shadow femininity may appear as manipulation, emotional testing, seduction without sincerity, victimhood used as power, indirect control, withholding, or relational punishment. These are not statements about all men or all women. They are patterns that can appear in anyone, shaped by wound, culture, fear, and survival. When these shadow energies meet, the relationship becomes warfare. The wounded masculine says, "I will never be controlled." The wounded feminine says, "I will never be powerless." The wounded masculine hides tenderness behind dominance. The wounded feminine hides fear behind manipulation. The wounded masculine withdraws to avoid vulnerability. The wounded feminine tests to see if love will stay. The wounded masculine treats needs as weakness. The wounded feminine may treat emotional uncertainty as proof that more control is needed. These are symbolic movements, not fixed identities, but they show how pain polarizes. One person's armor activates another person's armor. One person's distrust invites another person's defense. One person's control produces another person's resistance. One person's withdrawal produces another person's pursuit. The field becomes organized around protection rather than truth. And once that happens, both people may feel justified. Each can point to the other as proof. He says, "See, this is why you cannot trust women." She says, "See, this is why men are unsafe." Both are speaking from pain. Both may have evidence, but neither may be fully free. This is the difference between discernment and distrust. Discernment sees clearly. Distrust sees through injury. Discernment can say, "This person is not safe for me," without turning that person into a symbol of everyone. Distrust says, "This confirms what I already knew about them all." Discernment protects boundaries without hatred. Distrust protects the wound by keeping the heart closed. Discernment can remain compassionate while still saying no. Distrust often needs contempt to feel strong. This distinction matters because many people confuse distrust with wisdom. They think that because they no longer believe easily, they must be more awake. But the loss of naivety is only the first stage. Mature discernment is not the same as permanent suspicion. One is clear sight. The other is a wound scanning for repetition. A real awakening in relationships would not mean becoming more bitter. It would mean becoming more perceptive. It would mean seeing how attraction works without reducing human beings to strategy. Seeing how status influences desire without turning love into a market. Seeing how people manipulate without becoming manipulative. Seeing how biology participates without denying consciousness. seeing how wounds shape choices without excusing harm, seeing how language can seduce the nervous system into certainty. Perhaps most importantly, it would mean seeing oneself, because the false awakening is always outward facing. It says, "Now I know what they are." The deeper awakening turns the mirror back and asks, "What happened in me? What did I believe before? What hurt? What did I make that pain mean? What part of me closed? What part of me became addicted to certainty? What part of me now needs an enemy to feel safe?" Those questions are harder than ideology. Ideology gives answers. Healing asks for honesty. Ideology gives enemies. Healing asks for grief. Ideology gives identity. Healing asks for return. Ideology says, "Never be fooled again." Healing says, "Become discerning enough that you do not need hatred to protect you." This is why the spiritual layer of this episode is not about rejecting harsh experiences. Some people have been deeply hurt. Some have been manipulated, betrayed, shamed, used, lied to, abandoned, or humiliated. Pretending that does not matter would be another form of violence. But the question is what happens next. Does the wound become a teacher, or does it become a religion? Does the pain become wisdom, or does it become a prison with better language? A closed heart can survive, but a healed heart can discern. That is the difference. The healed heart is not naive. It does not hand itself to everyone. It does not ignore red flags. It does not confuse compassion with self-abandonment. It does not remain open to harm in the name of love. But it also does not need to hate in order to stay safe. It can say no cleanly. It can leave without dehumanizing. It can recognize danger without believing danger is all that exists. That, perhaps, is the real awakening, not waking up from love, but waking up from the wound that made love look impossible. Because truth should not make us less human. It should make us more capable of being human without being asleep. Personal reflection. The seduction of harsh truth. When I think about red pill consciousness, I think about how seductive harsh explanations can become when someone is hurt. Pain wants a structure. It wants a reason. It wants to know why something happened, why someone left, why someone rejected us, why honesty was not enough, why vulnerability became humiliation, or why love seemed to reward the person who cared less. I understand why the harsh truth can feel like relief. It gives the wound a frame. It says, "This is what happened. This is how the world works. This is why you were hurt. This is how you never let it happen again." And when someone has felt powerless, that kind of certainty can feel like strength. But through my wider work with this place called Earth, the inversiverse, the resonance matrix, nervous system language, and the mirror linguistic hypothesis, I keep coming back to the same concern. Not every explanation that feels powerful is healing. Sometimes it only teaches the wound how to speak with more certainty. That is where language becomes dangerous. A phrase can regulate the body by giving it a sense of control, but it can also narrow perception. All women are like this. All men are like that. Love is just a strategy. A vulnerability is weakness. A trust is naive. These statements may feel protective, but they also close the field. They stop us from seeing individuals. They turn pain into a category. They turn experience into ideology. I think this is where discernment matters, because the answer is not to become naive. It is not to deny patterns, manipulation, betrayal, status, attraction dynamics, or the fact that people can hurt each other deeply. But there is a difference between seeing patterns and becoming possessed by them. There is a difference between learning from pain and making pain the center of perception. For me, the test of truth is not whether it feels harsh. It is whether it brings more clarity, responsibility, compassion, and freedom. Does it help me see better, or does it make me more suspicious? Does it help me set boundaries, or does it make me contemptuous? Does it help me heal, or does it only make the wound sound intelligent? That is the question I keep returning to, because the harsh truth can feel like awakening, especially after heartbreak. But if the awakening closes the heart completely, then perhaps it is not awakening at all. Perhaps it is armor, and armor may protect the wound, but it cannot become the final shape of the self. Observation practice. Where has pain become a worldview? For this episode, the practice is to notice where past relational pain may have become a general belief. Over the next day or week, pay attention to the statements you make internally about men, women, dating, attraction, sex, loyalty, marriage, commitment, vulnerability, and trust. Notice where the language becomes absolute. Men always, women only, love is just, people never, you cannot trust, if you are vulnerable, if you care too much. These statements may contain pain. They may come from real experiences. They may have formed after betrayal, rejection, humiliation, disappointment, abandonment, or repeated patterns that made the body feel unsafe. So the point is not to shame yourself for having them. The point is to ask whether they are still protecting you, or whether they are now imprisoning your perception. When one of these beliefs appears, ask, where did this begin? Did it come from direct experience? Did it come from repeated wounds? Did it come from family conditioning, culture, online content, or someone else's ideology? Did it come from one person, or did one person become the symbol for a whole category? Then ask the deeper question, does this belief help me discern, or does it make me suspicious of everyone? Does it help me set boundaries, or does it keep my heart closed? Does it make love safer, or does it make love impossible? Does it help me see people more clearly, or does it force them into a story before they have revealed who they are? This practice is not about becoming naive. It is not about ignoring danger, excusing manipulation, or pretending painful patterns do not exist. Discernment matters. Boundaries matter. Experience matters. But pain also needs to be examined before it becomes perception. When a wound becomes a worldview, it can feel like truth. It can sound intelligent. It can even feel protective. But it may also keep the nervous system organized around old hurt. So simply notice where pain has become philosophy, where heartbreak has become certainty, where rejection has become identity, where distrust has become intelligence, and where healing may require not abandoning discernment, but widening it. Integration, from ideology to chemistry. So this is where episode 7 brings us. Red pill consciousness is not only about dating advice, gender politics, attraction theory, or internet debate. It is a psychological and cultural state where pain becomes worldview, rejection becomes resentment, and cynicism becomes mistaken for truth. It begins often with something real. Rejection is real, betrayal is real, manipulation is real, sexual insecurity is real, loneliness is real, shame is real. The feeling of being unwanted, replaced, ignored, used, humiliated, or emotionally misled can cut deeply into the nervous system. So the issue is not whether people have been hurt. Many have. The issue is what pain becomes when it is not metabolized. Pain can become discernment, or it can become distrust. It can become boundaries, or it can become contempt. It can become wisdom, or it can become armor. It can become self-respect, or it can become a need to dominate. It can become a clearer relationship with reality, or it can become an ideology that makes the wound feel intelligent. Red pill consciousness often gives pain a vocabulary. It offers words like awakening, truth, strategy, value, frame, leverage, nature, power, hierarchy, and manipulation. These words can create a feeling of control after emotional chaos. But language does not only describe perception, it shapes perception. And once a person begins seeing all love through suspicion, all gender through category, all vulnerability through weakness, and all attraction through power, the field of connection becomes smaller. The old frame says, I am awake because I see the harsh truth. The deeper frame says, real awakening increases discernment without destroying compassion. The old frame says, all women are like this, or all men are like this. The deeper frame says, pain can turn patterns into categories, but people are not categories. The old frame says, never be vulnerable or you lose power. The deeper frame says, vulnerability without discernment can be unsafe, but power without vulnerability becomes isolation. This is not a call to naivety. It is not an argument for ignoring patterns, red flags, manipulation, betrayal, or the harsh realities that sometimes exist inside attraction and relationships. It is a call to become more precise, to see the difference between an individual and a category, between discernment and distrust, between strength and closure, between truth and bitterness, between self-protection and dehumanization. Because when a wound becomes worldview, the wound does not disappear, it simply becomes the lens. This brings us naturally into the next layer of the series. If episode 7 has explored the ideology that forms around relational pain, episode 8 moves into the chemistry that can make attraction, obsession, bonding, and heartbreak feel so powerful in the body. Because before a belief becomes a worldview, and even after it does, the body is still involved. Desire has chemistry. Longing has chemistry. Attachment has chemistry. Intermittent attention has chemistry. Heartbreak can feel like withdrawal because the nervous system and reward system have become organized around another person. Why does desire feel addictive? Why does uncertainty create craving? Why can intermittent attention become more powerful than steady attention? Why does heartbreak affect appetite, sleep, concentration, mood, and the body's sense of safety? Why do dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, cortisol, and reinforcement loops shape romantic attachment in ways that can feel stronger than logic? In episode 8, we move into chemistry, neurobiology, addiction, and the hormonal bond. As we draw to the end of this episode, the red pill is not only a belief system. It is often pain looking for protection. It is a rejection looking for an explanation. It is humiliation looking for power. It is loneliness looking for a map. It is the wounded heart trying to make sure it is never fooled again. When pain becomes worldview, the world begins to shrink. People become categories. Love becomes strategy. Vulnerability becomes weakness. Distrust becomes intelligence. And the possibility of genuine connection is filtered through a wound that now believes it is the truth. This is the danger of false awakening. It can feel like clarity because the pain finally has language. It can feel like strength because the heart has closed. It can feel like realism because hope has been replaced with suspicion. But a closed heart is not always an awakened heart. Sometimes it is simply a protected one. Protection has its place. Boundaries matter. Discernment matters. Seeing patterns matters. Learning from betrayal matters. Refusing to abandon yourself matters. But conscious love asks for something harder than cynicism. It asks for discernment without hatred, boundaries without contempt, strength without emotional closure, truth without dehumanization, self-respect without superiority, and the courage to heal the pain rather than organize an identity around it. The deeper path is not to become naive again. It is to become wise without becoming bitter. To see clearly without turning every person into a threat, to know that harm exists without making harm the whole of reality, to understand attraction, status, manipulation, biology, and power, without forgetting that we are still capable of tenderness, growth, repair, accountability, and love. So, to close this episode, I leave you with this. Perhaps the real question is not, have I taken the red pill? Perhaps the deeper question is, has my pain become the thing I now call truth? If it has, can I return to the wound before it became doctrine? Can I grieve what happened without turning grief into hatred? Can I protect myself without closing myself completely? Can I learn from experience without becoming imprisoned by it? Until next time, thank you for joining me today. You've been listening to The Resonance Between Us, Episode 7, The Red Pill Consciousness. Gender narratives, pain, and algorithmic polarization. I'm James Miller.